Alright, so you can hear there's a loud noise in the background right now. That's because it's like 35 degrees, there's 100 degrees Fahrenheit here. And so we've got just all the fans on us right now because we don't really do aircon over here, sadly, yet. We'll get there one day though. So yeah, obviously you're back with me, Dan, and Emily is now joining us. I guess that's the phrase that people do in podcasts say.
I am indeed. Hello.
Hello. So obviously we went and watched Raw and SmackDown and a bunch of other things, but you just heard Will Ospreay on the cast there, and he just announced for Frontline Wrestling there's not going to be any gender divisions, there's not going to be any women's division separated from the men. It's just going to be purely based on weight, which I really like, and it makes sense. What about you? What do you think? How do you think that's going to go down?
I really like that. I'm really interested to see how it works out. In my mind, I love the dynamic that it's essentially going to be like how New Japan do it, but with men and women.
You did martial arts, and it's like, surely this is just like it's going to work out the same in terms of if someone's the same kind of like weight as yourself, there's no real disadvantage or advantage, you know, it's got nothing to do with gender, it just comes down to abilities.
In a manner of speaking, obviously bone mass, bone density and muscle mass is different, but down on an amateur level, and especially when you're taking into consideration the theatrics of wrestling, I think it's perfect.
I just mean in terms of like the logic, the story, because that's what people, there's going to be a bunch of people that get really angry and go, but this is a man versus a woman, and therefore, you know, it doesn't matter that they're the same weight, you know, it's not the same. But like, I think Jenny Shadeen, who's a former Reeve champion, if you've never seen her, go onto Eve on Demand and check her out. You know, she travelled the world competing in ground grappling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. And it's just started raining.
Sorry,
so
I just
lovely.
Distracted him because it's raining, and I love the rain, and it's insanely hot, so
yeah,
I love the rain
that's
even
fantastic
more.
news. Going to Jenny Shadeen, she travelled all around the world competing in legitimate shoot, ground grappling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments. She competed in one of the first ground control, and there was another tournament, the name I can't really remember at the moment, which was a subdivision of UFC. Actually, I say a subdivision. It was a UFC recognised event that Jenny took part in. That would have been around 2012, I believe. Grappler's Quest, that was it. And you know, Jenny would often find herself competing against men, because around this time there weren't that many women, you know, in MMA or doing these other variations of MMA, like focusing on the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitiveness or focusing on ground grappling. And Jenny Shadeen never lost. The lowest that she ever got was a silver medal. And I just think that's proof in the pudding right there. That's a very British phrase. That, you know, and she was competing against people in her same weight category, regardless of men or women. Is that not proof enough that the gender aspect doesn't come into it, but it's more down to the skill and the talent?
Absolutely. She's so inspiring as a person. I still find her inspiring. I still often think of her and miss her from our roster. And I do. She's the perfect example to show how there is logic to this weight division. And as I say, I'm really interested to see how it's all going to pan out and what's going to happen.
Alright, so moving on from that, Will's obviously, you know, in the World of Sport TV show, which is coming back to ITV this Saturday, actually. In fact, it might have already aired by the time you guys actually listen to this. It's a really exciting time to be a part of British wrestling as a whole, because the announcement of World of Sport has led to, it's really led to WWE's NXT UK division. I mean, that's the crux of it. If it wasn't for World of Sport, I doubt we would see NXT UK. Obviously, we've got no way of like saying that as a definite fact, but I think that's all likelihood
pretty
fair.
Close to the truth. I would
imagine. It's a fair assumption. From what I understand as well, is they are monitoring how well World of Sport goes down as to whether or not this NXT UK becomes permanent, or they stick with the 4 announced weekends that they've got lined up for the rest of the year, which is, it's a tough one, because it's like, it's reactionary rather than, you know, being, you know, proactive. You know, it feels like they're doing this purely to try and keep the market, which kind of sucks. But at the same time, everyone's benefiting. You know, the talent are benefiting from it. You know, obviously wrestling fans are benefiting from it because there's so much more product out there. There's more exposure now. Although I would argue that, you know, there hasn't been a massive increase in attendance from people appearing at WWE, NXT UK, or like the UK guys appearing on a number of the American shows before. I think Pete Dunne is probably the only person who could pop a number of extra people, because Pete Dunne's actually been on Raw. I don't know how much of a difference people being on NXT actually does to attendances. I don't think it makes a massive difference, because there's, you know, the NXT is only available on the network, so it's hard to, you know, use that when majority of your standard wrestling shows, you know, rely on your casuals and they won't have a clue. Most of them probably haven't even heard of NXT except for passing on WWE TV. But we're all really relying on World of Sport being a success, it seems, and it is on 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, which is prime time television. Really prime time. Such a potential for such a large viewership there. There's a potential also for, you know, the opposite.
A huge failure. Yeah.
That's why it's the most interesting, you know, time. There's so much rides on this, but there is a repeat on a Sunday morning around 20 past 10, I think it is, which to me that's the key one, because I don't want World of Sport to fail. I want World of Sport to be a massive success, because I think, like, I remember the difference in the UK house shows. I say house shows, I mean like the UK brand shows back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when WWE's popularity took off on a level like hadn't been seen since the Wembley Stadium days. And all the shows over here were doing so well. I remember seeing Scott Conway pulling in 700, 800, 900 people on like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights. And this was at a time when, like, the internet didn't really control the wrestling business. You know, nobody really knew who it was they were getting on those shows. It was a surprise to many people when they saw that the level of talent that some of those British wrestling shows had, with people like Robbie Brookside and James Mason on. So I'm reminded of seeing what can actually be achieved with World of Sport, because WWE averages only around, I think it's something like 150,000 viewers for an episode of Raw. For this time slot, for the show to be a success around this time slot, it needs to be doing around 2.5 million views, I think, which is, that's an astronomical figure. But the show that they did, the pilot back on New Year's Eve a couple of years back, did do around 1.5 million. So and that's New Year's Eve, which is actually a dead night, because everyone's getting ready to go out. So there's the potential there. I just see mainstream media who are so focused on, you know, what you get for Saturday night's entertainment. Because if you don't live in the UK and you listen to this, Saturday night television is very much an institution. All of the mainstream media talks about, this is coming to Saturday night, and it usually involves PJ and Duncan.
Ant and Dec, I believe.
Ant and Dec. I'm showing my age on that.
But it is, over here especially, Saturday night television is a big deal, especially with families still. And you do get a lot of families, and they will sit round and they'll watch a couple of shows in a row together.
On this specific channel as well. I should point that out, because as much as, you know, we live in the world of digital, we only really went digital, you know, not that long ago. So for a number of years, up until, what was it, like 5, 6, maybe longer. Maybe it's within the last 10 years. I can't remember. The last 10 years are so much of a blur. But you know, we only had 5 channels as a standard number of channels that you could watch in the UK. If you wanted more than 5 channels, you had to subscribe to Sky Television or get what was, we used to have cable. We don't really have that anymore. You know, so ITV and BBC One were the main stations, and it was always, and it still is, a war between them on a Saturday night, for viewership. And those are the two most watched channels in the entire country by a long way. Nothing even comes close to touching the viewerships of what BBC One and ITV does. So it has always been
it's an
a
ingrained
massive deal.
habit.
It's an ingrained habit, exactly.
It is like over here we have a roast dinner every Sunday. It's still really, really common that families have that, or like a variation of that, where, whether it's made from scratch or something from the freezer.
You go to the pub. If anyone's ever been to the UK and you walk around, walk around the streets and you see pubs, if they do food, they're probably going to advertise that they do a Sunday roast, and that is just part of British culture. And Saturday night entertainment is part of British culture. It is ingrained, as Emily says, into us. Now, that means that the media is always talking about it and always has an opinion. And when I mean the media, I mean the big mainstream media. I remember the days of celebrity wrestling. Now, that was a show that it actually premiered on the very same night as the return of Doctor Who with Christopher Eccleston on. In fact, it went head to head.
It's something my family put on the Saturday night.
Doctor Who?
No.
Oh, that's a shame.
Especially for me. They put the celebrity wrestling on because they knew that I was a wrestling fan. No one else liked it, so they were like, we can watch this together.
Or was this at a point where he was no longer interested?
I think he kind of lost interest when I gained interest.
Fair enough.
But we would watch like Strictly Come Dancing.
Yeah.
And we'd sit and watch that together as a family. When Top of the Pops was on, it was that. And yeah, because it was a wrestling show, they put it on, and it was atrocious.
And this got slated in the mainstream media as well. So the word wrestling wasn't really required. If you never saw what celebrity wrestling was, I don't know if there's a way to find it. I'm sure there's clips on YouTube. But it was basically gladiators. If you remember the old show Gladiators, American Gladiators, it was basically that, but using wrestlers. Roddy Piper was one of the hosts, and Joe Legend and D'Lo Brown were the captains of two teams that were always at war with one another. And it was then they each on each team were celebrities, like obviously not massive celebrities, but like former England football players and Olympic medalists and things of that nature, football players, and these were actually shoot style competitions, but they weren't really wrestling. The word wrestling wasn't really there. It should have been called Celebrity Gladiators, really.
Yeah.
But it featured the word wrestling, and I think if it had featured the word gladiators, when I say people, I mean the media wouldn't have jumped on it to hate it the way they did, because they never gave it a chance really. They jumped on it straight away after the first episode, and then the first episode did well ratings wise, and the first episode of things usually does do well ratings wise. It's the second episode you have to wait and see. After the third week's episode, the ratings were so low, heavily influenced by the media, because we very much follow what the media tell us to do over here, specifically the Sun. Usually if the Sun say who's going to win an election, it's usually who they say. The Sun and the Daily Mail have the most readers of any newspaper in the UK, and by a large number as well, I believe.
This is why I'm not a nationalist.
Yeah, exactly. So instantly they start talking about how much of a failure this is and how embarrassing this is to Saturday night television. And so ITV took it off and they put it on ITV2, which at the time was a digital only channel, not an analog channel that everyone had access to. And also ITV2 just does not do the viewership that ITV1 does. And then they changed its time, and I don't even know if it saw out all its episodes before they just took it off, but I know it went to like a morning time slot instead. But it was because it featured that word wrestling that instantly everyone was against it. And I think if it had featured, if it had been called Celebrity Gladiators, I can imagine people getting into it. I'm scared that we're going to encounter the same kind of bias because of the word wrestling, because we still live in this world where the mainstream media and majority of people, you know, and you only need to look on Twitter this, think that those people who watch wrestling believe it's real. They think that they can't understand, you know, what wrestling actually is. And when you try to explain to them, it's no different than EastEnders or a soap opera.
I think it's actually better to use theatre as an example because it is live and you're there.
Yeah, but they still can't comprehend because they go, but what's the point of that? Because they don't understand the story of a sport that's predetermined. There used to be a show on Sky One called Dream Team, which was about a fake Premier League football team, and it was a hit for a while. And I always think this, I try to use that for anyone that remembers what Dream Team is. You know, it was about this football team that do not exist in real life called Harchester United. You know, and you followed the dramas of the players of Harchester United, and then you'd watch highlights of their football match. You know, a football match, of course, is normally like 90 minutes. A wrestling match does traditionally not go 90 minutes. So every episode, a wrestling episode, has your soap opera elements, but also has your highlights, so your matches, you know, which are obviously a lot less in time. So, you know, I always try to use that, but still, people just go, oh, I just don't see the point. And I think it's just that ingrained bias that people feel like you're trying to con them, that people feel like you're trying to make out that what you're seeing is a real contest, and that we believe that these characters truly exist. We really believe The Undertaker is a person. You know, especially now that MMA exists and has become more mainstream, not as mainstream as it should be, but more mainstream than it certainly used to be. There's just that more of a bias. It's like, that wouldn't happen if you actually did that to them. You know, it's like, I watch MMA, you'd kill a man if you do that, which is a bit like when people talk about the old days of World of Sport. You often hear a lot of the older generation, or indeed just stupid people, say Big Daddy killed a man in the ring because it was real back then. Obviously it wasn't, you know, it was just featured a number of older guys, and, you know, a few accidents happened, and someone suffered a heart attack in the ring, and they were just in the ring with Big Daddy, you know.
I would say that the thing that it does have going for them is World of Sport, because over here, if anyone ever finds out what I do as a job, they'll immediately start saying about World of Sport. Big Daddy, Giant Haystacks, Mick McManus are usually the names that I'm given, and it is almost you just sit and wait for it, whereas other people might get, oh, like Hulk Hogan, or oh, like The Rock and things like that. Over here, people are still very much using the World of Sport names.
Even though that finished in 1988
I know,
or 87.
And The Rock is a superstar, he's a megastar. But no, the names that they say...
And that's what the mainstream media always point out as well. The mainstream media will still go Big Daddy, Giant Haystack, the British mainstream media, whenever they talk about even American wrestling.
Yeah.
They'll always find a way to get
World
Big
of
Daddy
Sport
and Giant Haystacks and the original World of Sport.
And I think that is something that, along with those people who are still very, very angry about feeling conned, because maybe when they were younger they believed it more than they wished they did.
Yeah.
Which there's a lot of resentment being held on to that still. I think you're going to get the other people who have really positive memories, or who will still be like, oh, but this is proper wrestling, not like the soap opera.
How many people are actually regularly watching World of Sport, though, that would go ahead and watch it now?
According to the media, every single person in the entire British Isles were watching World of Sport.
No, but I mean, it's like that's still alive.
Oh, well...
Because it's, you know, or would be interested in watching this, because it's, you know, this was 30 years ago that it came to an end, and not just that it's 30 years ago that it came to an end, but it wasn't doing the viewing figures. That's one of the reasons. There was also the fact that the tobacco industry wanted to sponsor, you know, something on the television at that point, and they didn't feel that wrestling was the right thing. But if they sponsored darts, which was a pub game, and of course you could smoke and drink in a pub, you know, then they could get their tobacco products on TV. That was one of them. But of course, a decline in viewing figures was then another. And a decline in viewing figures timed up with a number of wrestlers, you know, coming out and admitting that the business was bent, basically. In fact, the News of the World actually did a secret investigation where they then reported the tapes word for word about who would take the first fall, who would take the second, and then discussing it. And then Jackie Pallow Jr. wrote a book called You Grunt, I'll Groan, which exposed the wrestling business, and the viewing figures, of course, took a massive turn, or a turn at least, in the interest, because everyone now felt that they had, the proof that they needed that this was supposedly a con. And I think that people are just they're still ingrained that we're trying to con them, especially the media. So the word wrestling on primetime television is
it is a big problem over here, because people think it's a con.
Yeah, they think we're genuinely trying to con people with it. So I am scared, because I don't want to, we've kind of been on a roll with how well the wrestling business is doing over here, and I don't want to see the wrestling business repeatedly, mocked in the papers.
I think the nostalgia element is going to help.
I hope so. They're calling, World of Sport, and also I wonder how much though the media, the same media that shat on World of Sport, that looked to embarrass the original World of Sport, that looked to expose it as being a con. I wonder how much of that media may get angry with the opinion columns of what's on TV and things of that nature in these papers. For how many of them are going to get angry and say, "Oh, this isn't like I used to enjoy watching as a child with my grandparents," and complain about it not being the thing that the media originally complained about it being. Does that make sense?
It's going to be interesting to see, and I really, really want it to be a success.
Totally, and I'm hoping that Sunday morning time slot, that 10:20, because as much as I don't, it's the person in me who's not a massive fan of the commercial media, is doubting the success of World of Sport at 5 o'clock on a Saturday. Because again, I can imagine the papers. Going, "Why are we getting this on at 5 o'clock on a Saturday? Why haven't we got Philip Schofield or PJ and Duncan, who are your normal traditional Saturday night entertainment television hosts over here?"
Dermot O'Leary.
Does he still do TV? We don't watch TV.
You said PJ and Duncan.
That's because I'm old. I still think of them as being PJ and Duncan. But we know who I mean. That and Deck. They're the regulars, the regular Saturday night TV hosts on ITV. Can't be Bruce Forsyth now. He's dead.
We don't need to talk about that.
It's a sensitive subject with Emily. But he was also one of the main regular hosts of Saturday night television. And I can, very much imagine after World of Sport, the media, jumping on it and saying this isn't what we want on a Saturday night.
We will find out.
It's
not long now.
We won't.
A few days we'll know.
We will. But that Sunday morning time slot, that's what interests me. Because kids are up at that time on a Sunday morning. The only thing is how many kids actually watch ITV? Because kids are far more technologically savvy. Tech savvy. There we go. Kids are far more tech savvy. Like how much our kids don't even watch television really. They just watch YouTube.
They watch Netflix sometimes too.
YouTube.
But
they've just started figuring out there's some alright stuff on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, but they're mainly YouTube.
Yeah, no, but although we're a bit different, we're quite anti-media. We don't actually have ITV or BBC.
We don't have a TV license.
No, and so if you don't have a TV, if you're listening in America,
you explain that.
If you in this country, you have to have a television license if you watch television programs as they're being shown. You can. You don't need to have a television license if you only watch pre-recorded programs. But if something is being, shown, broadcasted on a television channel, and you are watching it, or if you are watching it via catch-up's now included in that, then you have to have a TV license, which I think last time we paid it was £155 a year. So, but and most of that money goes towards the BBC And there's only 2 programs on BBC that I like, which is Doctor Who and Sherlock, and they're not regular enough for me to justify, paying it, because I'm against the idea of the television.
Well, the BBC is meant to be neutral. That was the point, and they are biased towards the Conservatives. But we don't need to talk about that.
There's certainly evidence towards that. But that Sunday morning time slot has the opportunity to reach out and get those kids whose parents have maybe left it on ITV, or that's it's to me that may be a saving grace of it all. It's not as though kids have a less number of programs to watch on a Sunday morning like they did when we were kids, because they now have online streaming devices and mobile telephones. But that Sunday morning time slot, if the Saturday evening one is not successful, there is a chance that the Sunday morning time slot for pro wrestling, for kids, is actually a success. And it's good pro wrestling too. You've got people like Will Ospreay and Harry Smith on the show. In addition to the female talent that they've got on there, like Kaylee Ray and Viper and Bea Priestley, there's some Casey Owens, of course. There is some incredible talent on the World of Sports show. So it's not like you're getting a cheesy wrestling show. You're getting a very, very good wrestling show. So I'm hoping that even if the media turn on the Saturday evening slot, don't get behind, don't support it, or even if it's just not successful on a Saturday evening, I'm hoping that Sunday morning time slot, will be a success. Because if that's a success, it's going to lead to WWE doing more with NXT UK in response to that being a success. That leads to more work and leads to more shows and leads to more publicity towards British talent. But at the same time, that British talent is still going to be working for a number of independent promotions. And if those British talents that's featured on World of Sport, they're now television stars. So that should push up, hopefully, the attendance, and all the people that weren't wrestling fans before but want to go see those people that they just saw on ITV on a Saturday evening. Hopefully they'll now go and see the wrestling at the local venue, and it can go back to being, as I remember it in the very late 90s and early 2000s, venues that have like 1,000, 1,200 capacities, being full, even though it's a Tuesday or Wednesday night and people have got work in the school. I think that that's within our reach right now, and it's super, super exciting.
I agree, it is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to seeing how World of Sport plays out. And that actually leads pretty nicely onto NXT UK and the Evolution pay-per-view they've just announced.
Yeah, well, the Evolution pay-per-view is going to feature, so it says, talent from NXT UK. I would imagine they're going to bring on... Should we skip back a bit? And because we haven't really gone on about our Evolution yet, but NXT UK, so far the 6 women that we know of that are a part of that are Toni Storm, Ginny, Isla Dawn, Killer Kelly, who are all Mae Young Classic competitors, and Nina Samuels and Charlie Morgan. And NXT UK begins filming in Cambridge, actually at the same day as World of Sport starts broadcast on ITV. Coincidence, I'm sure. Probably is, in all fairness. It's a good six girls to start with the NXT UK brand. 6 fantastic talents. All of whom have appeared on Pro Wrestling Eve, so I'll get the plug in.
Yes, indeed.
And 4 fantastic talents that will be competing in the Mae Young Classic as well. So, with regards to Evolution, should we go back to Raw? We watched Raw. So we watched Raw, and it was... You've only watched the women's segments. You're not really interested in the rest of Raw, which is understandable. It starts off with the announcement of the WWE Evolution, WWE's first ever all-women's pay-per-view network special, I guess, event. And they done it as like it was a press conference in almost. I'm not a fan of mixing that, what's real and what's not, in terms of like all the women were on the stage and rivalries were put aside to hug and congratulate one another. It was like the Royal Rumble announcement.
Some of the terminology was inside.
Was it?
They did do an odd mix. Where
I didn't think they did
at
that.
one point they kept kayfabe. It was something that Triple H has said, and you know what? I wish I'd made a note of it. It's not a big deal. It was just something. I wouldn't do it, but
they're usually really careful on that kind of language. But that's the sort of thing. I just think Raw, or WWE in general, it's that is more. It's what you get more casuals watching than anything else. And so I always think it's when you do an announcement like this, it's where you kind of like blur the lines between the actors and the characters. We spoke about a number of the performers at WWE are now using their real names on Twitter, and their character name is the app, but the real names, which I'm a big fan of because I do believe.
I really want people to start doing that. It makes sense.
It makes sense, yeah, exactly. You're a performer whose skill set involves wrestling. You can do so much more than just wrestling. You can go on a film set. You can become a stunt choreographer, a stunt man, a stunt woman. You can be an actor. There's so much more to your bow once you have the ability to be a professional wrestler. And
it protects them.
Yeah.
And it does take some of that power play away.
Yeah.
Because, when people have got claim to the copyright name, to the character that you've been playing, you can still be recognisable by your name.
Yeah, absolutely, which is
what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it is in wrestling or outside of wrestling, So they had everyone on the stage, and they make the announcement, and everyone hugs, and the segment goes for, what was it, something like 9 minutes, wasn't it? We wrote it down. Here we go.
And that's
9 minutes 33.
And including the figure we wrote down does include the commentary team then.
Yeah, that's
doing
the
a
whole
recap,
segment with regards to talking about the women's pay-per-view. We're both in support, and a load of people have been asking us like, what do you think? And it's like, is it because WWE's Johnny Come Lately, like we're going to be anti this. This is huge, and like everyone should be supportive of this.
With Eve, the thing that we always said is that we wanted to provide a platform for women performers to be able to show how good they were, to be able to grow and learn. WWE have got the biggest platform.
Yes.
And in fact, I believe it was Steph who said that we're providing this platform for the women. It's like, yes, that is what they're doing. They're finally using that platform and putting it on the women.
We tweeted positively about this announcement. We got a few angry tweets and replies saying, yes, but it's their own booking that did this, and you're not wrong. It is them. Their whole this evolution is as a result of their own doing. In terms of like
they're like I could nitpick. There are things like they wouldn't acknowledge that they have done anything wrong, but
there was a bit of wording, weren't there?
The wording was that it was thanking the fans, but really they're like, it's because of the fans.
That's it. It's because of you that we're now taking. Basically, this is how it translates, isn't it? It's because of you that that 30-second matches now become. That was the insider term, wasn't it? 30-second matches now become main events.
Yeah.
Because that kind of why was it a 30-second match?
Exactly. That's what it was.
So there was that blurring of the lines. But it was your decision. It was you guys making these rules. It was so I completely get where everyone's like, angry, saying yes, but this is they're only having to do this because of their own doing in the first place. And you're absolutely right. But that doesn't change the fact that we still need to support this.
Well, it's like if I got really nitpicky, I really didn't like that Triple H went, and we are so proud of you. Like, oh, thanks for sounding horrendously patronising, purely because you're a man and you're talking about women. And that's really all it was. It's just...
I don't think that was the intention.
No. They absolutely... It clearly was not the intention. That's just how it came out sounding to me. It was, having a lifetime of being patronised quite often by men.
Because of the gender? Oh wow, because you actually did that.
Yeah.
Because you're a girl.
It sent that shudder down me, like the bleh. I don't like it. That line should have been given to Steph.
I'm not a fan of that behind the line anyway, because I don't like the idea that, but this is how they do things, but I don't like the idea that it's like, because we're up here and all you wrestlers, you're below us. And I understand, part of the reason of them doing it, but I always think it's like, you need to make stars. Can you imagine if in the Austin Rock, heyday, there was this, authority figure that spoke like that, where you're still blurring those lines of what's, real and what's not, and spoke like that. Like, imagine if someone said to Austin and Rock on the stage, they're on the stage as part of all this, and goes, "Oh, we are so proud of you.
You're selling a lot of merchandise, Austin, and we are so proud of you."
It's like, all of a sudden, Austin's no longer this badass, and The Rock's no longer this over-the-top badass in his own way, It diminishes that celebrity effect.
It's very... I think there are several things. One, I can nitpick at it, and if I really wanted to, I could list so many things that they could have done better, and it...
In our opinion.
In my opinion.
Same.
Certainly from a feminist point of view, but that's not something I would nitpick at, because they are learning on the feminist route and on the feminist journey. Feminism is different for lots of people, but it's also something that it is a male-dominated industry, and they are still learning. And so the line distribution between Stephanie and Triple H, it was off. Some of the
Triple H took most of it, didn't he?
Yeah, some of the phrasing, they were putting men and women, they were doing it that way round, whereas it's just one of those, it's very nice to do, and I think it gets people thinking when you flip it the other way and you say women and men and you say women's names first, because people aren't used to hearing it that way, and I think it opens them up to a lot of the subconscious sexism,
the subconsciousness
that goes on. But feminism, one, is very different to lots of people, and that's the kind of thing you just learn as you go on, like, oh, isn't it interesting if I flip this and change this? So I actually wouldn't nitpick on that. For me, it doesn't matter how much I'd want to do, how much I'd want to harp on, I didn't like this line, I didn't like the way they say that. None of that at all, none of it is going to take away from the fact that there is an all-women's pay-per-view that WWE are doing, that they're using the biggest wrestling platform that there is, and they're doing an all-women's pay-per-view. Not the first all-women's pay-per-view, but they are doing an all-women's pay-per-view, and that is fantastic, and that's what we all need to support.
Yeah, absolutely, we do, because this is, like we were saying about how World of Sport, with a bigger audience, can help push the main, can help, I want to emphasise, can help push the mainstream emphasis of professional wrestling to a larger audience. WWE are on a damage control because they're trying to, repair the damage that they had done to the women's wrestling scene with their previous booking, in spite of and that's not to take away from the hard work of all the women that were around in that way, because no one can deny that
you
so
do
many
your best
of those women,
in the role you're given,
and so many women clearly wanted more and to achieve more, and some of them overachieved.
Yeah, Trish is one of my favourite examples, and why she was one of my favourite women's wrestlers is you could see how hard she was pushing and trying to improve, and that she was just a model that they hired. They hired her basically for her looks, and she worked so hard and was constantly improving and improving and improving. She wanted to be a wrestler.
Yeah.
And for me, I found her really inspiring for that reason. Not because I knew that she wasn't the best wrestler in the world, but because she just didn't give up, and she was given this role where she was just meant to be this, and she could have just been that.
And you're talking about a point when you were a teenager, so it's not like you was this ultra hardcore smart that was following the business.
I was a teenager who honestly thought boobs were meant to sit like that. I was a very naive teenager, and even I could see that this was a woman doing more.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who remember like the match between like Trish and Jackie Gator, and and then you fast forward and see what Trish then ended up having. I mean, she had a great match with Stephanie McMahon. Credit to the pair of them.
She did.
There's Trish and Lita. That was the Austin Rock of the women's scene. It was every hero needs that anti-hero to, you know, balance it out. And Trish and Lita was a story that everyone could, any person that had been to school, you know, could understand and feel a role for. But there wasn't an undercard to take their part or continually work with them that they gave the same amount of screen time or respect to.
But it would literally be a glance of those two standing in the ring, and I could connect with it just from being in school.
Yeah,
and being around girls that looked, you know, girls that were the little, yeah, you know, the catty girl kind of thing, and the old girls.
Yeah.
And that was just something women could identify with really quickly. So, yeah. So it's not taking away from those women who worked so hard and did so well in the positions that they were put in.
Yeah, so many of them did. They overachieved, and so they are fighting. We're still seeing a lot of people. You only need to go on Twitter. I know Twitter is kind of like the worst place to go and see, but it is a general consensus for a lot of people that are still going to be like, I'm not interested in watching 3 hours of women wrestling. And there's going to be some people go, oh well, because that's a society thing and you can't really fight against it, except you can fight against it by normalising it and presenting women's wrestling as just as good women's wrestling. I think again, there's a bias there, but if you go and watch WrestleQueendom, you'll see a fantastic, you know, wrestling show regardless of gender. That is one of the many, many, many examples out there of great wrestling that just so happens to involve women. And proves that, you know, every person in the audience at that show, because so many of them just went to it just because it was the thing to go to. You know, they weren't women's wrestling fans; they were just going to it because it was, you know, Eve crosses that line of wrestling fans and people going to one of the cool things that's happening in London, and everyone came away, you know, raving about that event. And there would be so many others that if they watched, they would come away from raving about as well. Mm-hmm. But the majority of the commercial, casual audience haven't had wrestling presented in that way. And I'll kind of come back to this in a moment. So we said that the whole segment announced on Women's Pay-Per-View lasted 9 minutes 33 seconds, which was actually longer than all of the other matches on the show, all of the other women's matches, bell to bell. You know, it was so funny how they said 30-second matches became main events.
And then did a squash
and
match.
then the opening match was squash. Now, obviously, I'm not
love
holding
a squash
it.
match.
Yeah, it's just the timing. The timing of it would just seem like, oh, man.
Oh, no, I'm holding it against them for not then putting on a solid women's match on that
there
show.
should have been.
I'm not holding the squash match against them. That's part of the story. But not then putting
bad planning,
on...
bad forward planning.
Yeah, bad show structure.
There should have been a match that showcases just how good, you know, like the women can be when given a bigger structure and platform, and I'm sure we're going to see that over time. But how many people watched that episode of Raw and then saw those 3 matches of which the crowd were dead through all of them? And it's not like there was anything fundamentally wrong with the matches, it's just there was nothing to really engage you. And there's been some really questionable booking on who's a babyface and who's a villain.
They did.
In WWE.
Raw was Mickey and Natalia.
Which was a fundamentally sound match. The start I wasn't so keen of, but it was a fundamentally sound match. It was the most professional. Oh, my voice went there. But it was the most professional of the 3 women's matches that we saw in there. They had a fundamentally sound match, but the audience were dead. There's been no real turn for Natty. She's just gone from heel to baby, so you haven't got that audience connection. And if you haven't got an audience connection, you've got just people doing moves, and people, you know, it's not to say the audience don't care about her, but, you know, they need more to buy into the person's, you know, mentality right now. You know, they need to understand the character. And I really like Natalia, and I really like Mickie James. Yeah, they're both fantastic workers.
Yeah.
And if you give those 2 time, and you give those 2 credibility, you know, like they could have a hell of a match. But there hasn't been enough credibility given, and now they're on a position where they've got to give credibility on the quality that people are going to see to watch a 3-hour or 4-hour all-women's event, and they really needed to have backed up their words on the announcement of the show with providing that as prove. And they didn't. They gave us 3 very short matches.
I also think it now means that there is a lot of responsibility of people on social media wanting to get people to really give the women a chance, really watch the women and see the talent there. In my opinion, people are now responsible to actually objectively view and review the women's matches they see.
Yeah, don't say it's a good match just because it involves women. Don't allow the gender to like lessen your standard. A good match is a good match. A bad match is a bad match. And if you're a paying customer, whether you're subscribing to the network or you're going to a show and buying a ticket, you know, your £20 or your $20, you know, requires the same level of quality in what you're getting, regardless of the gender of the performers.
So what I personally is one of my pet peeves is if people saw that match between Mickey and Natalya and they were like, oh, that was a really great match, I really want everyone to see that, these two are 2 great wrestlers, and they had a really great match, and they just said the word great lots. But if someone said that and then watched
then tried to
New Japan and said, you know, Okada had a really great match and it was really great, and you should watch that.
Same. Obviously the presentation and the opportunities are different,
but it's one where those 2 matches wouldn't be the same level because those 2 didn't have any emotional engagement in that. They didn't have that much time, and the crowd, it wasn't like a babyface heel match.
Well, it was, but not
a clear-cut one
really
where everyone understood it was.
I still maintain that the audience don't really understand what Natty is because there was no big babyface turn. She just was all of a sudden Ronda Rousey's friend and trainer, and now she's a babyface.
But the important bit...
Can you imagine doing that years ago? Like, you know, when we think back to those of us that were around back, you know, you remember Shawn Michaels turning on Marty Jannetty, you know, and some people, you know, they switch now and there's just not that emotional attachment, and it's hard to remember whereas, you know, the big switches we all remember. We remember when The Rock went villain, just as he'd gone babyface in the Survivor Series Championship, you know, tournament. We remember, you know, people switching from heel to baby. You know, there is the evolution around it. People can't see you do that.
I know, I just did it to you to make you giggle. We remember the thumbs down
for Triple H and Batista and Randy Orton, and Randy Orton's on Batista's shoulders. You know, there are so many. You know, this is what develops your attachment to the characters. You know, when somebody switches. And there hasn't been that for a lot of them. There was a lot of confusion over what role Nia Jax was playing. And I understand people say, oh, just accept the characters as they are, like it's a soap. But, you know, there is still, you know, soap operas still make a point of saying this person is a bad guy and this person's a good guy. They still clearly identify the reasons behind, you know, what way they go. And there hasn't been that. And it was the Mickey James Natalya match was a fundamentally sound match.
I was just about to say the important part is it's fundamentally sound. There was nothing wrong with that.
I enjoyed it.
It's just, if I want someone to really love women's wrestling and I want to show them a fantastic match, I'm not telling them that one because that would not be doing justice to women wrestlers out there who have amazing matches.
No, totally. And there is. And again, it comes down to, on this show, they should have backed up their words because there's so many people that are just going to be like, I'm not watching a 3-hour women's show, and they had an opportunity there to, by announcing that, you've kind of got to go prove it. And I'm sure over the coming weeks, especially in the lead up to that pay-per-view, they've got to do something, and I can well imagine them bringing up some people from NXT, hopefully, and establishing them and seeing some quality. But it's not like the women on the WWE roster can't do a lot of the things that the women on the NXT roster. Everyone goes, the women at NXT are fantastic. They're better than the women on the main roster. That's not true.
They're being
entirely. They're given different time lengths and different opportunities. You know, there are so many great talents on the main roster. I actually thought the best match of the week was for the women was actually Becky Lynch and Carmella, which had some emotional attachment to it as well. They actually went longer than all of the other matches, all the other women's matches that week. It was 9 minutes all in with the promos and everything that are attached, but it was a I don't want to say it was like a great match or anything like that, but it did its job, and they got the characters over. There's something about Carmella that I think a lot of people aren't connecting with. I think we spoke about it last night. I think it's the style. You look at her body shape and you look at the style, and you would almost expect there to be a few more, striking or
that
something.
Her body shape doesn't fit the wrestling she's
But
doing.
I wouldn't be able to
like,
define her wrestling style, actually. I think that's kind of...
For me, when I first saw her come out on NXT, I thought she was going to be a star, because her character work and the way she held herself, some people hold themselves like a celebrity, and they just do. You can walk past people in the street and sometimes something pings in your brain because you're like, that's a famous person, and you might not be able to say who they are or figure out why, but they hold themselves in a certain way and they present themselves in a certain way. And I felt that from the beginning with Carmella. I was like, that woman is
and
a
a
star.
hard worker too. You look at how she started, and you look at her, like she's clearly working hard.
But her wrestling does keep improving.
Yeah.
Like Liv Morgan, her wrestling's been improving and her character's been developing.
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with that match between her and Ember Moon. It was super short, but everything was fine.
She's someone that I enjoy watching for the development of her as a wrestler.
Well, you've enjoyed watching the whole Riot Squad on Instagram. You said that when we were
I
watching,
do.
which is good, because it's almost like they're not getting a load of other opportunities to get that emotional attachment. So if you was to take away that, how much more would you have been interested in watching Liv Morgan versus Ember Moon?
Yeah,
you haven't.
You
haven't really connected to Ember Moon, have you? That's what you were saying.
No, I haven't. But she's I like the intensity she has when she wrestles. I'm not feeling the connection between the entrance and the in-ring. It's got better. There was something right at the end of the match. She put in some elements where you can see this slightly otherworldly-esque character and this intensity. But from her actual wrestling,
She kind of just becomes another wrestler.
It's like she comes down and it's like, awesome, wrestle. Then we're a little bit awesome because it's the end. And it's like, that's really cool. I want to see that character bit in the middle as
Makes
well.
sense. Which is why Nikki Cross is so good. Nikki Cross, her in-ring...
But she's always... always been that way. She gets very good and worked at it.
Yeah, and I know they're very different styles, but that doesn't take away... Rock and Austin are very different styles, but, the Rock entrance and the Rock wrestling were the same. And Nikki Cross, her entrance and her wrestling, it's the same. And Ember Moon, even the character seems to become different, from the entrance
it's
and
way
into the
more
ring.
fluid than she was in NXT. So
The
more
NXT
elements
audience were more, I don't want to say forgiving, but it's a different audience.
In
isn't it?
NXT,
So they're
I felt like there was
match.
just a massive difference between her entrance and in-ring.
Yeah.
To a ridiculous level. So now it doesn't feel like that anymore. So that's good, and I'm hoping she'll put more
Which is
in
fine
the ring.
because that's what NXT's for. Anyway.
Yeah, and with Liv and the Riot Squad, loads of it is watching them, how they are three very different people, but they do just seem to get on as friends.
Their looks all started to add up more, because it didn't at the start. They made no sense as a trio when they first came out.
But it is like, I don't know, it could be fantastic planning and talking through it, but I don't even care. I feel like I've got to watch a friendship develop through Instagram stories, and then seeing them develop as performers on the shows as well. And I've really enjoyed that, and I like that connection, and I'm sure you can tell.
And credit to them for doing it on their Instagram as well.
I'm sure you can tell from the bits. I've been saying that one of my favourite things with wrestlers is watching them develop as performers in ring. That is one of my favourite things to see as a wrestler. Because it shows that passion and love for wrestling, It shows that they have it too, that they've got that drive.
I respect anyone that makes their own opportunities, that when they're not being given perhaps everything that they would require, they go ahead and make their own chances, you know, and them making the most of their social media is a prime example of that. Going on to the Becky Lynch, or coming back to the Becky Lynch-Carmella match, which again I felt was the best match of all the women's matches on Raw and SmackDown. I'm not including NXT in this. The one thing that I noticed in all of the women's matches across the two shows, I say there was another women's match that we haven't spoken about, and that was Billie Kay and Asuka, which wasn't very long, and it was more like a showcase for Asuka, or kind of feels like they're getting Asuka ready for somebody else, maybe for Charlotte's return. Or...
I'm assuming they're building up for her to have a main spot.
Yeah, there was the match between Asuka and Billie Kay was only about 90 seconds. The whole segment with the Iconics and Asuka, including the pre-match promo.
They have the Iconics doing like
a selfie interview,
a bratty type.
Oh yeah,
catty.
I'm not a fan of I just feel like it's been done before. It's like a go-to gimmick for a lot of women. It is. It's the go-to.
It's that go-to. It's one of the go-to women's gimmicks. And then we'd had with Lana at ringside, we'd had like a just before that, we'd have essentially a cat fight happen. And this is actually with regards.
Well, it's got a pop. Like the audience were invested because they're invested into the two characters, which is quite funny. How the audience seem more invested into two characters who predominantly don't wrestle than they are to some of the wrestlers. But it all comes down to the presentation. And they're getting more character development time, even as a second.
See, for me, it was actually one of the things I was going to say that with the nitpicking, this is actually the area I would nitpick on, which is another one for the whole make your point. You're doing the women's pay-per-view, so that's the time where on that show, the announcement, where you want a really good showcase women's match. It also, for me, is when people say, oh, it takes time for change and everything, there are some very simple things that you can do that will make big changes. And you don't even need to make a big deal out of them. Just like there are plenty of moves that WWE have stopped everyone doing and they won't allow them doing. Just take off the hair pulling.
Well, actually, that brings up, that's what I was going to get to, sorry. There was 5 matches total for women. And in 3 of the 5 matches was the same cut-off spot from the girls that none of the guys did in any of the matches across Raw or SmackDown, which was the heel just grabbed the hair and threw him down. And there was that time in WWE, and I don't know if they're still taught this or anything at all, where there was this belief that you're a girl, so wrestle like a girl, grab the hair a bit more.
I just think like they got rid of moves that they felt were dangerous. I think it's a time to just quietly get rid of the
cliche
cat fight type nature, the slaps done in a certain way, and the hair pulls type thing, or however you're doing them. We can just not do them, and it's not going to take from the matches because the men's matches don't have those moves, and they're still doing well. So it's just, I'm not saying that they can never ever be used in women's wrestling. I'm saying this is a really good time to just rest them and say
absolutely.
We are not having that stereotype, because then in a while you get that bratty little character coming in, but why not use something more evolved at the moment?
This is the thing, right? People need to be retrained on the structure of the women's matches as well, because we can't have the same cut off from the heels of the hair pull on, let's say there's 9 matches on the women's show. We don't want to see that from like 4 or 5 of them. We don't want to see it from 2 of them.
This was
if someone does a hair pull, that should be because their character would pull the hair, not just because that's a cut off based on their gender of pulling the hair, or because their character is so similar to other characters because there's a lack of character development.
It was a huge thing that we had to do when we started Eve, when we said about doing this platform for women to be able to show how good they could be as wrestlers. Part of it was explaining the different wrestling styles and structures, because all the women had for so long been doing the women's match, and so there was this real danger.
Basically, your job is to do 8 to 10 minutes in the women's match.
A hair pull.
Yeah, we remember
Bronco
hearing
Buster, Bulldog.
Bronco Buster, Bulldog. We remember hearing people say, you know, give something for the dads, do the tombstone.
Yeah.
You know, because obviously of the position of that.
And the bit where you like Austin would do it. Luther's press, that's the one.
Luther's
but
press.
grab their hair and just...
Yeah.
Like, just bang their head on the floor. But it would... A big thing would be that a lot of the matches, if there was a real danger that they would all be that match.
The girls were taught, what's your
because
gimmick? You're the girls' match. And that's what a lot of them were taught.
And it is... So what's your gimmick? I'm a girl, and I'm the good, I'm the good guy, and I'm a woman, and that was their gimmick. So it's really, what were we saying? Yeah, it's something where that would be a danger, but you would have thought that that's not a trap that they would fall into, of having the same spots in every match, and they need to start developing those characters and showing them as individuals quickly, and get rid of those stereotypes. And that is actually a super easy fix to get rid of the stereotypes, and that's just to stop doing them. I'm not saying forever, but just stop. Just
take it out.
Just be like, none of those moves.
How UFC made the women, important straight away. They literally just, like, how they presented them was they are stars, and that's that, and that was very, very important to the acceptance. And it's not to take away from either Liz Carmouche or Ronda Rousey's, efforts in the promos, but the presentation of the pair of them, and obviously Ronda Rousey has that X factor, but the presentation was, so important into the success of it. And you're going against, whereas UFC was starting from scratch, WWE are going against, or having to retrain their audience from everything they've taught. And I think there are subconscious things, like I used the hair pause, the cut off. It was used in 3 or 5 matches. It might have been. I don't think it was used in the Billie Kay Asuka match, but I can't really remember. But that match only went 90 seconds, so it's. But yeah, in 3 to 5 matches, we saw that same hair pull cut off, which again is just has a subconscious effect on people watching.
And WWE can't delve in as deep on certain things because they don't really want to point out in as plain a way that it is literally their fault.
Yeah.
That the women were being oppressed because of decisions they were consciously making.
Yes. I'm sure they would argue that that's where society was, but I would...
No, they were making the choice to do that.
There was a counter-argument to that. That's where they need to start retraining, and they need to do it now. They can't rely on, oh crap, we've got this women's pay-per-view coming up in 4 weeks' time, we better quickly do something. They need to retrain that audience now, because you're going to have that subconscious sexism that we experience as promoters of women's professional wrestling, resisting it. So you really need to nail it, and make a big deal in terms of the, showing that you've got great wrestling from the women.
But the women have to not only do great matches, they have to do great matches and be able to connect with the audience. Yeah, the audience there are all going to be there supporting. So that's good. It's for the people watching. We need them to connect and support as well.
Absolutely.
And this is me wanting the women. Yes, this is me wanting the women to have the best possible chance they've got, because I want it to succeed and be done again and keep succeeding. So that's the big bit for me. This isn't me like, oh well, not this, not this, not this. I just want it to be the best it can be.
There are a number of the women on the roster have never been given an opportunity to. I just don't want this pay-per-view to be like 3 hours of the matches that you'd see on Raw and SmackDown, plus if they were given a main event spot, or if or the equivalent of the position that Bayley and Sasha Banks had on the NXT, which, you know, they stole the show. I couldn't tell you what the main event of that show was. I just remember, you know, that match. I'm sure it's a great main event as well, but that shows you the importance and the level and the attachment of those two characters. But I don't want it to just be the equivalent of Raw and SmackDown matches for 3 hours and then a main event. You know, there's got to be a feel.
We don't want the TV movie where it's like you're watching a big long. There is nothing wrong with it, but it just felt like a long version of the TV episode.
Yeah.
That's what we don't. We want the blockbuster.
Yeah, and that's what it needs to be to change people's perceptions. If there is a genuine interest in changing people's perceptions, you need to do that. And they have the roster, you know.
They have
I'm excited
the talent.
for you know, exactly, because Becky Lynch, one of the things that I like about Becky, I don't think that she excels in short matches. I think that, you know, she's not as physically naturally gifted as like a Charlotte or an Asuka, but what she's fantastic is actually the art of professional wrestling and storytelling. And she is someone that, if she's on a longer show, will benefit from having a longer match, because she can tell a good story with those longer matches.
She can connect.
Yeah, she can.
She can connect to a casual audience.
She's
skilled.
She has that ability. She has an X factor of her own, and I'm wondering, are we going to get a pay-per-view? Because they've said there's going to be over 50 women on it, because they like their numbers of multiple people showing the depth. Are we going to get a pay-per-view where we see longer matches, and therefore, you know, from a lesser number of individuals, and then maybe segments involving a large number of people, or are we going to see a number of short, you know, TV style matches, and like I say, that one or two main event style matches? And I'd hope that we're going to get longer matches with more depth from all of them, because that's where they need to go. That's what they need to showcase. And they need to, you know, start doing it, you know, now, as opposed to just, as we said, like 3 hours of a TV movie with lots of 4-minute matches, because it's not off to a good start.
It's not good when your announcement took up more time than the bell-to-bell action of the red. That's not a good start. But I have no doubt that it's going to be a good pay-per-view. But I want it to be the best.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're going to have a number of the people from the.
It'll be good because there's that nostalgia thing is going to be, because they're clearly going to have Trish and Lita.
I didn't think the Women's Royal Rumble was very good, but lots of people did.
It didn't do it for me.
No, I thought that the action in the Women's Rumble, the interactions between a number of the wrestlers was sloppy, and holding it to the same standard as the men, like it. You may have had more emotional attachment because of the nostalgia fact, like you're saying, but the in-ring doesn't add up, and a number of people, you know, watching it are gonna, and the casuals, this isn't a smart thing, the casuals are gonna see when something looks bad, when bad wrestling is bad wrestling, they know, and they're gonna hold the women far more accountable than the men, because they've got more examples of men doing good wrestling than they have of women, because of sheer number of time spent on men to time spent on women. So they're more forgiving of two guys, you know, making a mistake than they are of women. When two guys make a mistake, they're like, that didn't look very good. They might make a joke about it. They might even do a "you fucked up" chant.
But they won't write off every male wrestler.
Exactly. Whereas when two women make a mistake, a lot of that casual audience and a lot of that wrestling audience will just go, "That's because they're women," you know, and they will put an onus on an entire gender.
It is a lot of pressure. The women on our roster felt it at Queendom. It is a lot of pressure, because if you botch everything on that platform, you know, as a woman, that a lot of people are going to blame and write off all women's wrestling because of one botch that you did. Whereas it doesn't happen with men. So
yeah,
it's a lot of pressure for the women they're going to use on that show.
We find as well that there's, from the smart mark audience, you know, the hardcore, the diehards, whatever you want to call them, you know, they have this thing based on nationality. So if someone's from Japan, instantly they're amazing, which is not the case. There are some amazing wrestlers from Japan. Meiko Sanomura has been announced for the Mae Young Classic. Io Shirai, of course, is in WWE now. Kairi Sane, another fantastic Japanese performer. We've brought over Emi Sakura, Sakasa Fujimoto. There has been Riho, Hikaru Shida. You know, there are fantastic wrestlers in Japan, and you could argue that, you know, 2 of them are the best women's wrestlers in the world, full stop. But that doesn't mean there's a load of crap in Japan as well. Just like, you know, it doesn't mean a nationality doesn't define how good everyone is. It just might be that there is the Japanese women's wrestling scene, you know, is obviously much more further developed in terms of acceptance. But Toni Storm and Kaylee Ray and Viper are 3 of the very best in the world, and I'm sure a number of people go, yeah, but that's because they went to Japan. It's like they progressed. You know, they still had that ability to progress. You go back, Kaylee Ray was 19 when she first started wrestling for Pro Wrestling Eve in 2011. And then you watch her in 2012 against Emi Sakura on the iPay-per-view Wrestle Fever. The difference in that time, because Kaylee Ray works hard and actually progresses. You know, there is a number of talent over here that haven't gone to Japan yet, but are fantastic wrestlers. Nina Samuels, Millie McKenzie. You know, there's a number of performers in America that don't get, and I feel that American wrestlers are given more respect instantly for being American than what Europeans are, and British. But there are better American wrestlers and there are better Australian wrestlers than there are in Japan, because your nationality doesn't define your ability. Your hard work and ability defines your ability. So when you're able to bring all these wrestlers from different nationalities together, you're going to have an amazing card. I've forgotten what the point I was going off on that actually, but it was like, you know, there is that subconscious belief, which is something else that people are fighting against with the diehards as well. You know, that because this person isn't Japanese, they're not as good. They're not a good wrestler, and they're not as interested in. So there's a lot of things that, you know, WWE are fighting against from the diehard side as well as the casual side, although it's obviously bigger on the casual side because they make up a much bigger audience. But they need to start on it now, not all of a sudden rely, you know, when they're suddenly like 4 weeks away from the pay-per-view, start thinking, oh, we better start doing this on our weekly TV shows. You know,
it's steps that they can take, and they can take them immediately.
Yeah.
Just as simple as get rid of the cattiness.
Yeah.
There's no need to have the cattiness. Define the characters, get rid of the cat fight moves. That's a huge thing. And another thing that would be really great when talking about the women on commentary, if they have a connection to a male wrestler, you don't need to mention it. Just saying that because Dan was talking about the Women's Rumble, and it was just so many of the women, they were just talking about the men connected to them. We had John Cena talked about, we had Daniel Bryan spoken about.
That was actually a good point, actually, as well, going back to the Women's Rumble from a casual standpoint. We was in a venue that was broadcasting the Rumble, and the venue was full, and the venue kind of like half emptied for the Women's Rumble because they weren't interested in the Women's Rumble. So this is something they're fighting. So this is something they need to get onto, you know, doing something about now.
Well, before you interrupted, what I was saying is it's really important for the commentators as well to be treating the women as stars of the same level. And if you're treating a woman of the star of the same level, you don't really need to be referring to their partner constantly.
No, totally.
It's just unnecessary. So, yeah. That's
a really good point. And again, there's a lot of subconscious elements and things like that. I'm constantly hearing about the partner. That's a subconscious element.
Well, how many times they'll be thinking that mentioning the guy who's popular that they're connected to will help get them over. When we still get it a lot now, but it was very big in the first year of our relaunch of Eve. We got almost just daily emails from men who were telling us how if we let them on the show to work this angle, they can do this and do that, and then it's really going to get the girls over.
Oh,
it would be their work
to explain that
from male wrestlers messaging us, and male fans as well, telling us, you know, I think so and so would be really great. Could you put him in for a few bits? I bet he'd be really great at getting so and so over. That. We still get it. It was a lot at the time, and people have backed off a bit now.
Big Vito being like, I wear a dress, so therefore I know I can come and work Eve. And you're just like,
you can't though.
No, you can't, because.
But it was built into fans and male wrestlers that we needed the male wrestlers and to reference them and to have them there to get the women over, which means they were placing the men above the women.
Yeah.
They weren't needed. And we have proven that. And WWE, that's just another thing they can just quickly put in, like, oop, we don't need to go on about that.
Yeah, totally.
You can, if you want to mention so-and-so's, I think...
we're not including, like, Ms. and Mrs. Do you know what I mean? That TV show.
And I also
they've got
think
their own platform.
There are bits where it can be relevant to mention it. I know with the Bellas, people are just going to mention that, but I'm saying you don't need to harp on about it. And actually, it does show... with crowd reactions and how ingrained it is for people not to think of it as strange on our wrestling shows when Dahlia came down.
Yeah.
And I said, accompanied to the ring by Mr. Dahlia Black, because women are so often referred to as a subject.
Yeah.
You know, I would be Mrs. Daniel Read is how some people send posts through to me, and I am not Mrs. Daniel Read. So, but it got such a big reaction from the crowd, and no one expected, and it just sounded really odd. No one expected things to be said like that, because it's not a reversal. If you put something in reverse and it's really odd, it's probably because it was unbalanced, and it
is. Yeah, you know, again, it's hitting a lot of people's subconscious biases.
Yeah. If you start saying women and men instead of men and women, it sounds really odd to start with, and it will immediately jolt something in your brain that will be going like, oh, that sounded weird.
Yeah.
Because men always get put first, and it's become more accepted. So yeah, working on those subconscious sexism that they have inadvertently promoted, and then getting rid of that out and out sexism that they have willingly promoted. Mm-hmm. Just the little things that would really go a long way.
Before we finish off, we've got to mention something about Eve, because I'm sure, you know, lots of people want to hear it. So there's nothing else that I could think of and added to that. I think we covered.
We had some
subject.
Questions.
Oh yeah, no, totally.
We
did and ask us anything. Have you got those questions?
I have got some of them. Look how organised we are. Okay, so I've got one. Which local venues would you most like to use for future Eve shows?
Local? What, like local to us? Like we live in Suffolk. So.
Well, I mean, I love Resgow. It's my home, and I'm comfortable there. If you mean like local to other places, it's difficult if you don't live in the area. It is a case of doing research, finding venues that are a good fit. We actually have a woman we're working with at the moment who runs burlesque shows, and so what she's doing is acting almost as an agent for us, going around and sussing out venues, looking at the dimensions, looking if we could run shows there. So we're always scouting venues, but there's not one I could say I definitely want to run there.
No, there's none that I can immediately think of. I thought the Stratford Circus was a fantastic venue.
Yeah, I like
actually.
that.
I could well imagine, you know.
I could imagine an Eve show there.
I could really imagine running a show there. But there's nothing that we're like, Royal Albert Hall. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I can't think of any venues that I'm just like, yeah, you know. The instant one is I just really like that Stratford Circus venue. I like the layout of it. I've got one. Someone says I've got a bunch of people. Are you planning on having tag belts in Evil?
We've actually got the longest running tag tournament going on in
so
Eve. You might not be aware of it.
So long that one of the tag teams is actually retired now.
Two of them. the Owens no longer tag, the Owens twins.
No, but Carmelo and Sarah actually retired wrestlers.
They have both retired from wrestling full time.
Yeah.
It's a very, very long running.
So basically, we started a tag title tournament back in 2013. Obviously, we went on hiatus for a short while, and when we came back, everything started kind of from scratch on that aspect. So, do we want to do a tag title? Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
My favourite, I would actually like to do a trios title. Not to say that we would do that instead of. I'm not saying that this is something that'll ever happen. But if I had the ability to just, choose, I would love to do a trios titles. The issue is if you've got to make space for them on the show, because you've got to have more tag matches basically. Because what I don't want to do is for us to have tag team champions, and this is the challenger of the month.
Basically, what the women's match was, we don't want the tag matches to be that.
We don't want it to be like, so if there's a tag team division, there's got to be, tag teams underneath. Sometimes that's harder to, maintain on the independent scene, getting the two wrestlers, on every show amongst the women, because there aren't any established women's tag teams really. So it's a very hard thing to do, and to be done, we would want to do it right, because we wouldn't just want to have the one feud is over the title. You'd want to have, undercard feuds. Like tag team wrestling is what made me a wrestling fan. It wasn't singles wrestling; it was tag team wrestling. And so to do it, we'd want to do it right.
It's exactly how we are with everything at Eve. We don't do things by half, and if we do something, we do it the right way.
This one's suited to you because you're a film person. I don't watch many films.
Oh,
what are your favourite wrestling cameos in films or TV? Example, Hogan in Gremlins 2, Jesse and Mean Gene in Repossessed, Billy Gunn and Sabrina. I never knew that, but I did know the Jesse and Mean Gene in Repossessed. I just haven't, which is a Leslie Nielsen film.
I need to watch that though.
I didn't think it was very good, but I watched it when it was brand new.
Well,
so
I love Leslie Nielsen.
So, yeah, I don't instantly have that.
I do. I just don't think I don't even know if it. No, it is a cameo. I loved Vader in Boy Meets World.
I knew you were going to say that.
See, I loved Boy Meets World. I loved Vader. Then there was Vader in Boy Meets World. It was really surreal. Yeah, so there you go. That's mine.
Actually,
there must be more.
I can't remember. I think it's actually. No. I'm getting Baywatch and Thunder in Paradise confused. And Thunder in Paradise was a show that starred Hulk Hogan. So, I don't know. Basically, there was a story, I can't remember if it was Thunder in Paradise or if it was Baywatch, that featured the giant Gonzalez, old El Gigante, and he used to protect pelicans, and he was really protective of these pelicans. But I can't remember if that was an episode of Thunder in Paradise, in which case I don't know if it would count as a cameo, because it was a show that starred wrestlers. He just so happened to be a guest star in that episode. Or if it was Baywatch.
My favourite movie with a wrestler is probably still The Princess Bride. But that's not. Seen. He's not a cameo, so.
No, he's a mate. Well, in that case, then my one doesn't count because it's not really a cameo; it's a guest star. So I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, fail. What are your favourite songs by wrestlers?
I'm going to say The Rock, It Doesn't Matter, because that is the only song by a wrestler that I can think of. Wyclef was in it.
What about Roddy? Yeah, Wyclef Jean, featuring The Rock. What about Roddy Piper, I'm Your Man?
Oh, well, can't we say Shawn Michaels doing his theme?
Yeah, that would be a song by him as well. The whole WrestleMania album, including Bret Hart's There's Never Been a Right Time to Say Goodbye, which is just him talking, because no singing whatsoever.
I feel like if I listened to Mickey James stuff, that I would find songs that I liked.
I
just happen to have not listened.
We've both seen Fozzy. I've seen Fozzy live multiple.
Fozzy's not my.
Fozzy. You just so happen to go see them because Pitbull Mike Bulk was supporting Fozzy.
Yeah, I love his band.
Yeah,
I love Spot.
And Pitbull Mike, for a lot of people that don't know, was actually, along with Pitbull
Dave,
Big Dave, they were Emily's trainers when she was training to be a wrestler.
Oh, wow.
And
they were lovely, and they didn't. It's people always thought they were really scary because they're a big, intimidating team, but they were not some of those trainers that used to just want to beat up the guys to prove a point. They cared, and they're really good, really lovely people.
Yeah, I really like Fozzy. Fozzy are a great band. I've got their albums.
He doesn't get to play them because I'm a horrible wife. But he has to listen to like GBH and Exploited, and you have to listen to all of the music I listen to.
Whereas I rarely get to play any Iron Maiden.
You like Dream House?
Dream House is good. I do like Dream House. And Kate is good actually as well, Kate Nash.
Yes.
Her live stuff is fantastic. She does a lot more metal in her live stuff, and it's really good. Do you believe a female exclusive brand or show on a weekly basis would be best to highlight women's wrestling like 205 Live, or does that single it out as being a niche rather than just a great wrestler so you happen to be female?
I'm going to answer first because I have a really quick answer. I would say that 205 Live is failing, so as in I don't hear people always talking about it and always excited about it, so I don't think a women's show doing that would be a positive.
With regards to 205 Live, I think the only reason, I don't want to say it's failing, but their matches...
failing seems like a real harsh word. I would have picked a different one.
They don't have a lot of emotional attachment to the audience because you don't see the 205 Live people on Raw anymore. They've taken off Raw and it's just their own show now. But also when they were placed on Raw, it was just in here's your 205 Live match. But by that point, you'd already seen John Cena, Roman Reigns. So, and because they weren't presented as stars, you didn't have the emotional attachment and the reaction from most of the audience. So the audience would be quiet. If you was to put 205 Live, instead of after SmackDown, where they've seen all these big superstars, if you was to have them start the show, I'm sure that the audience would be louder because they're excited to see the wrestling. They've gone to see the wrestling. And everyone's excited for the opener. It's like, if you go see a band, do you put the support act on after the main act? No. You don't. You put the support band on first. No one would stay for the support band at the end. I say no one. Very few. And because the support band aren't as big of a star as the main band, then they might not get the majority of the. They're not going to get the reaction after the main band has been on. And it's the same with 205 Live. 205 Live, from a live event perspective, when you go to see SmackDown, which is when 205 Live is taped, 205 Live is the support band, but they follow it after you've seen the main show, and therefore the crowd are quiet for it.
So maybe my answer is more I think that would be good, but not how I think WWE would do it.
Yeah, I think
I don't trust WWE to make that show. How about that?
Yeah, I think if they was to do it from Full Sail, where it was, and the whole show it wasn't taped as, we're taping the women's show and the guys' show at the same time. I think where the women, again, don't have as much screen time as the guys, so there's more emotional connection to a number of the guys than there are the women. If they was to, if you was to go to a TV taping, and I really hope that the women's only pay-per-view doesn't feature any guys matches, even as dark matches. I really hope the whole show is just purely...
How do we feel about referees and commentators and ring announcers? I'm assuming they'll do what we do, which is get as many women in the... Sorry, I hit the mic. Get as many women in the available jobs as possible.
You don't risk. That's the thing. It's like it's harder on our side, because there aren't as many women commentators on the independent scene.
There are not.
Nor is there as many women referees. Often when a woman goes to a training school, if they're not really feeling the wrestling side, they're told, "Oh, you can be a valet," and they're not really taught to be referees. And there's still a number of people whose mentality is you can't have women referees because you can't have men backing down from women. And
a man would back down from a female police officer.
Exactly, you know, and if you, it's your job in getting that authority figure over. So, you know, but you have to have. So, for example, we have 2 female refs in Eve, but we also have 2 male refs. One is predominantly Tom Scarborough, and the other, when Tom Scarborough's not around, is Steve Linsky or Chris Hatch. And occasionally there's been Rob Brazier as well, who was an initial referee on Eve, when there was no women referees at all. Lauren and Heather are still learning on the job. So, you know, we're giving them those opportunities on the shows to progress and get better, because very few people are. I think Lauren literally just referees us and Triple L. I don't think she referees anywhere else. And it's not that she wouldn't, I don't think she's just being given an opportunity to, because there is that inherent sexism, you know, towards women.
And she is,
in an
for
authority role.
Any promoters listening, just an absolute pleasure to have in the locker room. She's lovely, friendly person, helps out.
She's better than a lot of guy refs on the scene.
Yeah, but it's just when you have someone who help and will pitch in and like be there helping put the ring, you know, put the ring up, take the ring down, there helping put the set up. She absolutely gets to, she's an asset. She's a complete
she really
asset
is. So please,
as a
if there's
person.
any promoters, do listen, do try and do book her, because, you know.
And she always asks for feedback, and she always works on it.
There was a show at the Resgo recently called IWL, which is a very enjoyable show, and they had a referee on there. It was a young lad, and Lauren is a better referee than that lad. And I can't help but feel, and I'm perhaps wrong in this because I haven't spoken to the promoter about it, but I doubt he spoke to Lauren. Again, I doubt, I don't know for sure. But Lauren would have been a better ref on that show than the young lad. She's far more commanding. She's getting better. She still has a lot of room to improve, but she's getting better. Heather hasn't done it for a number of months because she's been off due to medical issues, but Heather was constantly improving as well.
She was.
And Tom Scarborough is the main referee in Eve, and it's because he is, in my opinion, I think in your opinion too?
He's a very good referee.
He's the best referee, in my opinion, in the country. And the referee's job isn't just there to be a part of the show. They are keeping an eye on the safety of the wrestlers in the ring. And you cannot, you know, have someone in a position, you know, of keeping an eye on people's safety if they're not ready to. It would be great in an ideal scenario, you know, where you can do everything, as you know. But we had women photographers at WrestleQueendom. Obviously, Leanne was on the microphone with me, doing commentary, and she led that broadcast as well. You know, and Lauren was a referee for half the show at WrestleQueendom as well. But you know, you've got to have people actually learning those jobs.
Being a ref is like driving, I think, because like when you're learning to drive with not an automatic car, there are so many little details that you have to keep an eye on, and when you first start driving, it's overwhelming. You know, I have to change gear here, and I have to do this, and I have to keep an eye on the petrol and the speed I'm going and the other cars around me and all of this. And it's really terrifying, and with a referee, there is so much they have to be thinking on that people never consider, and it is, along with the health and safety of the wrestlers, it is keeping an eye on what the fans are doing near the ring. Yes. Is there a message from the outside that someone's trying to convey to them quickly?
Has something gone wrong, and you've now got to deliver a message between the two wrestlers at the different parts of the ring? Or
is the time suddenly being cut and you're having to quickly get that message across? Or, yeah, just something, a trip hazard in the ring.
Yeah.
Has someone's gear gone up their bum? Because that happens, and you have to try and, with men and women, you have to be like, you know, hungry bum going on there.
Yeah, there's a lot to do as a ref than people realise. So there is, it's an ideal scenario. I think WWE have more options and obviously a bigger financial ability to bring in fantastic referees from around the world, far more than what we do. So I would like to see an all-female referee cast. I would like to see all women's, you know, commentary team and announcers
Camera women.
You know, narrators. I'd like to see that. But again, you know, there needs to be training on this.
Yes,
you know, because it is a skill set.
And you don't want your first pay-per-view to have that's all of the main stars to have amateurs in there who are still learning, because their place is NXT, where you're learning and developing.
At Eve, what we've done is we've recently been having a number of the wrestlers take turns in doing commentary. So the main commentary team on Eve at the moment is actually myself and Leah Owens, who Leah brings the best out of me. Leah is really good. Leah's a natural. Leah could be, if she wanted to make this a full-time career, I honestly think Leah Owens could.
She really could.
Yeah, she was fantastic. The only reason it's me is because Ollie Sandler, who again is Ollie Sandler, Oliver Bennett.
He's a photographer.
Ollie Sandler is a photographer. Oliver Bennett isn't around as much, and the ideal commentary duo for Eve would be Oliver Bennett and Leah Owens. Oliver Bennett is just a fantastic commentator, but Oliver Bennett travels around the world doing commentary for Eurosport and Olympics and all these other things, so he's not available as much. It's the only reason it's myself and Leah Owens. But on the last Eve show, Leah Owens wasn't there, so Nina Samuels did some, Rio O'Reilly did some, Jamie Hayter did some, because we're just trying to have a load of the talents and learn so many different roles of the job. And also, when a wrestler knows a role and has experienced the role of a commentator, it then gives them a better idea as well of what they can do to make the commentator's life, you know, easier, or just have them explain things. It helps, you know, bring up another level of communication between the two, and it really helps. Like, the wrestler benefits, the commentator benefits, everyone benefits. WWE have the ability to, you know, have people training at the Performance Center in commentary. I don't know if they do. I haven't asked anyone, but it would be great to have a female voice every week on one of the main. Didn't Renee Young actually do it? And she was really good. Didn't she do NXT for a while? And she was actually a natural. So it'd be great to see if Renee Young takes the reins of the Orange pay-per-view.
Didn't they say Lita was doing it?
I can imagine them having a 3-person booth.
Lita was
like
not a
Beth
natural.
Phoenix, unless she's wrestling. No, Lita's not a natural. No person, very rarely do you find someone natural though. It's bloody hard. I hate commentating.
Yeah. When I actually finally had the guts to try it, I was like, this is not for me. This is way more. It was something I wasn't a natural at.
It is really hard. But WWE have got the ability to have people learn this, and WWE have obviously a financial ability as well. Like, they do have 1 or 2 women referees. I don't know if one of them's up on the main roster or if they're purely on NXT. But I believe they do have 1 or 2, and they have the ability as well to bring in female wrestlers from Japan, because they have that kind of budget. I don't know if they would still have to, you know, make the female wrestlers in Japan, you know, aware of some of the things that they do that may be different elsewhere. But those refs are going to be confident. You know, so if there's a match, say, between Kairi Hojo and Kairi Sane and Io Shirai or Meiko Satomura, you know, or indeed anyone anyway, because they're always working with foreign talents. You know, those referees, you know, are good. They can do that. So it'd be great to see that. But going back to the question, you know, it can be totally done. I would just have to be, in my opinion, done as presented as an all-women show, and that is literally what you see when you go see the live tapings.
I think
to begin with,
I
because
think
still
with
establishing.
Eve, we could do a very good all-women show presented as that, because, as we said earlier, we present Eve as a wrestling product, as a very good wrestling product, because that's what it is.
What do you think about Moolah's problematic legacy? You know, it is what it is. I know it sounds like a cop-out as an answer. There is so many stories out there. It is a problematic legacy. It is from a time when the exploitation was running around. But there are people that defend Moolah who say they were one of her girls and that she looked after them. But there's, from what I know, far more people telling other stories with regards to it. So
I think,
don't know really how to.
For me, the biggest thing we can do, if there's a way to prosecute people, then I am all for that. that for me, the entertainment industry as a whole is rotten. And there's a lot of disgusting things that people have been able to get away with, and I think the biggest emphasis should be put on moving forward and ensuring that doesn't happen again, and making sure that those people are not welcome in our industry and have no place in our industry, and that kind of behaviour, or justifying that kind of behaviour, has no place in our industry. So it's it's that it is. I don't see, when I say it is what it is, it's vile, but it's done.
Is Jamie Hayter entitled to a championship match? She keeps winning matches, she sure as hell will be. Jamie Hayter is a fantastic talent. If you haven't seen Jamie Hayter, then start watching Even Demand. Jamie Hayter's fantastic. She came out of nowhere at last year's She Won series, and lots of people just weren't talking about her beforehand. She was one of the sleeper stars of the She Won, and she's just only gotten better and better and better. Your thoughts?
I literally had people pulling me aside after She Won, and I had messages on Twitter of people saying, where the hell did Jamie Hayter come from? Yeah. Like, she's amazing and she keeps improving, which is, exactly what you were saying.
And she's got an amazing attitude, so like, we had heard, as you always hear in wrestling, some like stories about Jamie. Like, we've been told by another promoter, do not book her, she's got a bad attitude. We did book her, along with Zoe Lucas and Erin Angel. Erin Angel became unwell and was unable to make this show, if I remember correctly. And we were struggling to find another driver, because this was literally 11th hour, like when they should be leaving. We were struggling to find another driver and another way to get them up to the venue in time for the show. And Jamie Hayter was, who we'd never dealt with before, so this is like the first time that she's ever worked in an Eve show, did everything she could to find a driver. She was ringing her normal life friends as well as wrestling life people. You know, she did everything she could to make sure that she could make the booking. That doesn't sound like someone that's got an attitude problem. That sounds like someone is doing everything in their power, to fulfill a commitment, fulfill what they want to do as well. They clearly want to be a part of the show. And when she turned up, cracking attitude, a pleasure to work with. And I wasn't doing commentary around this time because we had Oliver Bennett around, and so I would put myself around the audience so that I could feel how the audience felt when a wrestler would come out. And when Jamie Hayter made her entrance for the first time, she had such presence and star power about herself, and she got an immediate reaction from the audience. And I felt that because I was in the audience around, and I'm looking around and seeing how they're responding to that. Like, I just said to Emily, like, we should think about putting her in She Won. And you're obviously doing as you always do. You watch from the stage because you're ring announcing. You were like, abso-fucking-lutely.
There are a couple of people we worked with, you get it from the entrance, but you do then wait just to see, how they're meshing in ring and how they perform as well. But they're just, I know it's Charlie Morgan, Jamie Hayter and Millie McKenzie were ones where it's just like, she's a keeper. You just get this instant like, yeah, she's a keeper.
Yeah, she really is. And sky's the limit for her. She's off to Japan in September as well, for Stardom, and she's gonna grow out there as well, because she's gonna
that's what she does as a performer.
Yeah, she learns. She gets. I don't remember the last I don't remember like a bad Jamie Hayter match. She's so good. More people need to see her.
And it was like, I thought she was amazing. Then Eve after Queendom, she came down on that show, and I remember it almost took my breath away. I was standing in the ring ready to announce her, and she made her way in, and I was like, she's more of a star. She's standing in, like, how did that even happen? How did she suddenly, between these two shows, like level up on star power.
Yeah.
It's rare. Nikki Cross is someone who's done that. A lot of wrestlers will do it, but it was just it's something that it did take my breath away for a moment, because suddenly she was superstar.
You need to experience Jamie Hayter live.
Yeah.
I think that is the best. She's a fantastic live event performer. And you can experience Jamie Hayter live on August the 11th at the next Pro Wrestling Eve event. We haven't announced her match yet.
Or that she's on the show.
Well, she's on the show.
But she's on the show.
So Jamie Hayter will be on the show. It currently has the 2 matches announced, which is Casey challenging Charlie Morgan for the Pro Wrestling Eve Championship. Casey, of course, defeated Charlie Morgan at the last event and She Won qualifier. No Charlie Morgan, no defending She Won series winner in this year's She Won. So Casey's obviously now the #1 contender to the Pro Wrestling Eve Championship, and obviously another massive She Won qualifier, Kaylee Ray versus Viper. Again, 2 people that were in last year's She Won, that only one of them can go through this year. We've seen a number of people go. This year's She Won is wide open. As so far qualified, we've got Millie McKenzie, obviously her first She Won. Charlie Evans, obviously, her first She Won, and Casey, what will be her first She Won as well. And so, while it'll be either Kaylee Ray or Viper who will be the first person to, return to She Won as someone with experience in it, which is hard for a lot of wrestlers to do, so it does count. It does really pay to have experience, because it is 4 shows over 2 days.
It is a grueling competition.
It is. It really, yeah.
Absolutely. There is actually some footage, and it's Mako with like a wet towel.
Oh, an ice pack.
An ice pack on her head, and a wet towel holding it on, and she's just like flopped back in a chair with her eyes shut, just kind of breathing through it.
And this was after her match with Emmy, wasn't it? So she still had the final to come.
Yeah. So this wasn't this. That's how grueling. It's something that Mako Satomura had to take this moment, but all of them were like that up there.
Yeah.
I know Charlie was there saying, like, I don't think there's a piece of my body that hasn't got a bruise on it.
True, and it's again before the final.
Yeah.
Because the She Won is, okay, it's a play on G1, but it is our G1, which means everyone goes out.
We called it that for a point, that the audience would know what to expect,
Yeah.
and our roster knew what they were being told they could go in there and do.
Yeah,
we see G1, now we're going to do She1.
Yeah, any match can be a main event.
Yes.
That is literally what She1 is. Any match can be a main event match. There's no handcuffs on anyone. Not that we really do that anyway. But like anyone can be a main event. It's
everyone's going out there to do the best match they possibly can. Every match they want to. Everyone wants to steal the show.
Yes.
But the most beautiful thing I think about how the Eve roster works in the back is that everybody wants everyone else to steal the show at the same time that they want to steal the show.
Yeah.
They all support each other genuinely, and it makes for such a lovely environment, and bizarre that you want to be the best on the show, but also you really want them to be the best on the show too.
Yeah, totally.
And it's genuine. It is like that.
Also on this show, Millie McKenzie will go one-on-one with Jetta on August the 11th at Riot Girls, the next Pro Wrestling event. So that's an exclusive announcement, as we don't even have the versus screen made for that one yet, so I better message Ash actually. So that's August the 11th, and of course we've got the Global Women's Strike show on September the 27th, which is a Thursday, which features Mako Satomura versus Toni Storm and Jordan Grace versus Killer Kelly as the first 2 matches.
Just a real chill Thursday show.
Yeah, just a real chill Thursday show, and then of course 2 days later will be Jordan Grace versus Chihiro Hashimoto.
That was me clapping.
Yeah,
everyone's
super excited. Like, this is the best. Like, this is proof. Go back and watch WrestleQueendom. Come to these shows. Come to the August shows. See these matches. You'll see, fantastic world class wrestling. Just so happens to be women, but it is world class professional wrestling. So tickets on sale, obviously, at ewrestling.com. We do have a load of other Ask Me Anythings, but it's running late.
There was one, really quickly. Would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
A horse-sized duck.
That's also what I go with, but I wouldn't want to fight it.
No, you wouldn't want to. But
And
like
also,
if your life depends.
But the little, just 100 tiny horses, that's adorable. It's a hard question.
Yeah, no, they would be adorable.
They would be. And you know what? A giant duck, I'd also find a giant duck adorable. I don't think I'd find it frightening, but if it came at me, I would. Swans are terrifying.
Yeah.
I also found out, apparently, they can't break your arm.
Oh, so that's a myth. Myth busted. There you go, exclusive right here. Mythbusters
Enjoy.
Episode.
Now you do a proper close to the show.
Obviously, thank you to my lovely wife. I love having her here and talking wrestling with you and being able to do it in Raw and SmackDown. For joining me on this show, which is...
Thank you for inviting me onto your first podcast.
I know, which I still haven't named yet.
Dan Talks.
Lots.
Wrestling. With other people sometimes.
Yes. Thanks to Will Ospreay for being on this episode. Keep checking back here. Listen for more episodes where you won't have, hopefully, the sound of fans and or the sound of traffic in the background like you've had on this week's episode. Thanks so much for joining us this week on the premiere episode of the Dan Read Show. I'm probably going to get heat for this. Joining me next week is the Pucker One, Greg Burridge. Greg is a joint head coach at the London School of Lucha Libre alongside Gary Vanderhorn. And some of their success stories include people such as Will Ospreay, and specifically with Greg, Sheamus in the WWE, among many, many others. Greg is also the joint head coach at Eve Academy, the London School of Women's Wrestling, alongside Rhea O'Reilly. He has wrestled all over the world, including many of the world's most famous and known wrestlers. He's also an actor, writer, stuntman, fight choreographer, and so much more, most recently releasing his own film called London Rampage, which starred him, Jimmy Havoc, Will Ospreay, and a number of other wrestlers who were able to take their skills developed and learned in professional wrestling and put them to your TV screen. He'll be talking about that and so much more in his interview on next week's episode. Obviously, so will Emily, and you never know who else might join us on the next episode. Thanks so much for joining this week. If you'd like to send us your questions, you can do so by @ing me at Dan Read on Twitter, or indeed at Emily Read Eve on Twitter. And tell us what you'd like to see on future episodes. Who would you like me to interview? Who would you like to see on the show? And what would you like us to see us, or hear us rather, specifically talk about? Again, thanks so much for joining me this week on the Dan Read Show. I'm probably going to get heat for this. And we will be back next week. Bye-bye.